All right, we continue this conversation now with Thembisa Fakude, Director at Africa-Asia Dialogues. A very good evening to you, Mr. Fakude. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. Let's start. We'll get to the conditions and the continuing negotiations in just a moment, but I just want to look at the overall benefits. We saw a Gauteng vegetable juice company being lauded by Prosper Africa for being a model of how AGOA can actually help small South African and other African producers scale up their businesses by breaking into the US and wider markets. But is Ghana a unicorn, given that Ghana's Deputy Trade Minister actually bemoaned the fact that businesses, they aren't benefiting because of lack of access and information?
Yeah, I think this is the beginning of something big, which most African countries will start assisting, particularly small producers and business people to scale up so that they benefit from this agreement. What we've seen so far are only bigger companies, most of whom are multinational companies based in Africa, benefiting from AGOA. But I think what we'll have moving forward, at least until the 2025 renewal date, you're going to have governments intervening and ensuring that smaller companies scale up and do indeed meet the requirements and all the other necessities that it takes for them to be able to be proper exporters of goods and services from Africa to the United States.
So to scale up that trade, we also need to see investment between the US and Africa at a greater volume. The entire AGOA value chain, though, the ecosystem, the supply chain, are the objectives of creating jobs and boosting local suppliers in the value chain actually being realized?
Well, I don't think so. We've had a lot of people criticizing AGOA for not facilitating at least those companies that are here in Africa, most of whom have got a lot of subcontractors within their value chain, therefore failing to meet the initial objective or intention of AGOA. That is, not only was it meant to promote business, but also to encourage employment, particularly in African countries. We know that there has been reports that the AGOA has facilitated some job creation in the United States to a number of about 155,000 jobs that have created as a result of this. But it has been very difficult to actually quantify the number and impact of AGOA in terms of employment numbers in African countries, including South Africa.
And I want to stay on South Africa for just a moment. From the demand side, we've seen that they've done pretty well. But what about other African countries, just in terms of, are they getting equal opportunity to grow the number and market share of US buyers looking to source competitive products in Africa? And I'm also thinking about the textile industry. It seems to be de rigueur, people are buying a lot of it, but what about the bottom line?
Well, most African countries, of course, struggle because, it's okay at the government level to enter into such bilaterals, but do they really translate to smaller business people or medium-sized business people on the ground? And one will argue that they do not, because the requirements and the prerequisites of entering the United States market is quite complicated, including just general export to any other country. The US has got very stringent rules in terms of goods and services coming their way, notwithstanding, of course, that there are these bilaterals that facilitate this business and seek to reduce the red tape, but still there are other basic rules and regulations that cannot be bypassed. And I think there is a need for an intervention of some sort, particularly by the governments of African countries, to educate one, but at the same time to bring the United States, particularly the consumers in terms of business, to Africa to some extent give the African medium-sized businesses some crash course on what is actually required, because that in itself is exhausting to many African companies and at the same time discouraging for African countries to even start exporting into the United States because of these stringent rules that are required by the United States market.
And beyond that, it seems to some, if you talk about exasperation, there is the mission statement on values and principle, which to some seem like a moving target. We've seen several countries, 4 of them, being taken out the list in terms of eligibility. The discussion around the extension of AGOA was underway at some point, I think 2015, in reference to South Africa. And there are already considerable deliberations focused on whether it should maintain its AGOA benefit because of its classification as a middle income nation. But given our current financial woes and the post-COVID environment, some of these issues, did they arise again beyond the diplomat political issues that have been stickler points?
Yeah, and I think what the Americans will try and do this time around, because of the China's competition, they will try very hard to work with African countries this time around to make sure that there's smooth business between African countries and the United States, including trying to move the current impediments in terms of the medium-sized businesses trading with the United States, because, as you know, China is quite aggressive, and China has embraced a see no evil, hear no evil foreign policy when it comes to doing business and politics with Africa. And they are not sitting waiting for AGOA to succeed. They're certainly going to be coming and bringing competitive opportunities to African countries. And if the United States does not really move towards moving all these impediments and ensuring that business runs smooth as it was intended to be with the introduction of AGOA, I think they might lose to China, who is waiting by the sideline and being very considerate of the frustrations that small and medium-sized businesses in Africa are facing with AGOA.
And smiting South Africa will also smite other regional neighbors who are dependent on industries who have good relations with AGOA. But I understand that alternatively, what we could see US officials doing is impose additional requirements on the South African government to lessen trade barriers for certain US exports to South Africa to satisfy US officials advocating for a tougher stance. Is that something that we are willing to bow down to, given the fact that, as we mentioned on other issues, we are butting heads?
Well, I think so. I attended some of the sittings during this summit, and the South Africans are quite encouraged by the summit, and I think there is a sense that they will do whatever it takes to make sure that they meet the requirements imposed on them by the United States, because apparently there's big business to be done between South Africa and the United States. But at the same time, there is pressure from the particular politician from the United States to expel South Africa from AGOA for other reasons which are political, including the South African stance on Ukraine. Not having said that, I think the South African government will continue negotiations, and they'll somehow meet halfway in ensuring that business from both directions succeed.
And I'd imagine that would also involve having a bird's eye view of what is on the table, the overlapping tariff regimes to bear in mind, not just AGOA. The broadest is actually the most favored nation status negotiated in the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade via the World Trade Organization. But there are specific expectations. So I'm just wondering, with the expiration of the US generalized system of preferences, where does this leave South Africa in terms of where it really pushes back and where it becomes more amenable than the political stance that it projects back here at home and to other allies?
Well, South Africa's got no choice but to move ahead. As I said, there is a sense, particularly from the Department of Trade and Industry Competition, that the AGOA is the way to go in terms of proving business. It's got a backing and support of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's desperate to see numbers of particularly export of South African goods and services into the United States. But importantly, he hopes that by the time we get to 2024, the trade between the United States and Africa will have improved the numbers of employment, and that will be good news for him as he goes or begin to go around campaigning for the re-election in 2024. So it's key that this succeeds, and hopefully we're going to see all those, particularly those who involved in the economic cluster, getting involved in in ensuring that AGOA succeeds and South Africa, again, comes out of this as a winner.
And that it is a win-win situation for both countries in terms of US and South Africa. Thank you so much for speaking to us, sharing your insights. Africa Asia Dialogues Director Thembisa Fakude.